Good. It's good that you are here with us. Good to see you. I don't know if you guys did this earlier. You were clapping before, but I want to just make sure that we acknowledge and recognize those who are joining us online. So will you give them another shout and a clap? Yeah. We're thankful, no matter where you're at, that you're joining us this morning. We are in the midst of this series, as you are probably aware, called Here, There. And we are diving into 1 Peter. We're going to finish up 1 Peter chapter 3 this morning. So if you want to flip to chapter 3, we're going to start in verse 13 here in just a moment. But we're starting to kind of wrap this series up here a little bit in the next couple weeks. And what we're really talking about is this idea that as believers, we're called not only to live here, but also there. Citizens here, as well as looking forward to citizenship in the kingdom of heaven there. And so that's what 1 Peter really is all about. And so I have a question to start off with this morning. I don't know if you're like me or not. Anybody really, really good at procrastinating? Some of you are late getting your hands up. Just saying, okay? I don't know if you're like me. Like I just procrastinate. And to the point to where if it doesn't become essential for me, it doesn't get done. Like I have a bunch of books on my bookshelf that have not been read. And I see a book and I'm like, hey, that's a great book. I should read someday. And I buy it and it goes on the bookshelf right next to all the other books that I have not read yet. I don't know if you're like me. I'm the guy who puts off shopping until Christmas Eve. Anybody with me? Thank you. A couple of you. Yes, make me feel better. Here, this is like personal therapy for me. There's so much that we can procrastinate in our lives, but there are some things that are not good to be procrastinated, right? Like there are some things you should just not put off, right? Like changing the oil in your car. You probably shouldn't procrastinate that, right? Or going to the bathroom. I know we're all adults here. I have 4 kids who procrastinate you're going to the bathroom, okay? That's just understand. How about this? Paying your taxes. Anybody procrastinated paying your taxes? I mean, it comes to a point to where you can only put that off so long and then they start coming for you, right? How about this? Picking your kid up from school. Anybody procrastinated doing that when you were raising kids? You really shouldn't procrastinate taking a vacation, right? Like we need a vacation. We need to take a break every now and then. How about this? Going to the doctor. Anybody good at procrastinating going to the doctor? Yeah, I think a few of us are, probably. How about this? Showing love to other people. We really shouldn't procrastinate that, should we? What about forgiving people? We really shouldn't procrastinate that, should we? We shouldn't really put that off. There are things in life that I think we should handle with urgency. Showing love to people we should handle with urgency. Forgiving people we should handle with urgency. And what Peter does here at the end of 1 Peter chapter 3 is he kind of dives into this section. And when I read this section, finishing up chapter 3, I hear urgency in him. I hear urgency in the words that he says. It's not just this whole, let's see how things go and maybe we'll do something in a little bit. It's the time is now. This is urgent. This is important. This is time sensitive. And this is, first, Peter is telling us here, I don't know if we have words yet or not, but this is what he's saying. He's saying the time is now to be serious about people's lives being changed. This is something we should not put off. This is something we should not procrastinate in our lives. This is what Peter is kind of laying into as we finish up chapter 3. This is not something we should do later. This is not something we should do when we feel like it, because we'll never fully feel like it. It's not when the stars align. It's time for us now to be serious about people who are not saved getting saved. The time is now for us to be serious about those who are far from God. And so we hear this throughout this last section in 1 Peter chapter 3. So we're going to take it by sections and just kind of break this down. Let's read the first couple verses here, 13 and 14. This is what Peter says. He says, "And who will harm you if you are deeply committed to what is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness, you are blessed. Do not fear what they fear or be disturbed." We're going to kind of pick this apart, and we're going to go over the next several verses as well. But here's some things that we need to know okay? Like 3 things we need to know, and then we're going to unpack another section at the end. First thing that we need to know is this. We should long for the good stuff in life. We should long for the good stuff in life. This is what Peter says. He says, be deeply committed to what is good. Be deeply committed to what is good. He says that in verse 13. There is a lot of bad things that we can be committed to, right? There's a lot of bad things that we can even long for in our life. Like anything that falls on that list of sin is a bad thing that sometimes we can be committed to in our lives, if we're honest with ourselves, right? Like if we're honest, we can long for sin in our lives. And yet, Peter here is challenging us. He's saying, you need to be committed to the good things in life. Long for the good things in life. Long for the good stuff. Things like when Jesus was asked, what are the 2 most important commands? You remember this in the book of Matthew? So out of all the Old Testament law, Jesus is asked, what are the 2 most important commands? And remember what Jesus says, right? Love God and love people. Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. This is the good stuff for us. This is what we should long for. Loving God, making more of a relationship with Him, spending more time with Him, having a better understanding of Him, spending more time in worship of Him. Longing for that relationship with God, and secondly, longing for that love for other people as well that are around us. Loving people who we are with, serving people around us, intentionally talking with somebody about Jesus. We need to long for people, long for God, love God and love people. We say often here at this church, we are about connecting people to Jesus Christ and each other. This is what we are about. This is what fuels us. This is what drives us. This is why we get out of bed. This is the good stuff that we should be longing for. We should be longing for people to come to a relationship with Jesus. We should be longing for people to be introduced to Him for the first time. We should be longing for people to get connected to other believers around them. This is the good stuff that Peter is talking about. But Peter warns here, when we long for the good stuff, sometimes longing can lead to struggle. Sometimes longing can lead to struggle. Let's jump up to verse 16 through 18. It says this, however, do this with gentleness and respect, keeping your conscience clear, so that when you are accused, those who denounce your Christian life will be put to shame. For it is better to suffer for doing good, if that should be God's will, than for doing evil. For Christ also suffered for sins once and for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, that He might bring you to God, after being put to death in the fleshly realm, but made alive in the spiritual realm. Jesus suffered for us, right? Jesus suffered because He longed for the good things. He longed for the good stuff in life. He longed for people to be close to God. And if we long for the good stuff in our lives long enough, sometimes that brings us to a place to where we go through struggle. Sometimes we go through difficulty, but it's struggle that's worth struggling for, right? This is struggle worth struggling for. Like people coming to Jesus, isn't that worth a little bit of struggle in our lives when people come to Jesus? Like, isn't it worth it a little bit in our lives if people get connected, if more and more people get connected to Jesus? Isn't that worth the struggle for us? At the end of the day, isn't it worth the long talks that we have with people over days, months, years even, that ultimately lead them to a relationship with Jesus? Isn't that worth it? Man, isn't it worth it? Some of you know what this is about. Some of you have friends, have family, have neighbors, have coworkers that you have been longing to come to Jesus. Now, I'm going to say that some of you maybe have been waiting and longing for decades for that to happen. But man, just wait until that moment, right? Doesn't it make it all worth it in that moment when they come to Jesus, even if it's decades? We need to long for the good stuff. We need to long for the good stuff. This is the good stuff we're talking about and what Peter's talking about. So because of that, because we long for the good stuff, Peter says there's a second thing that we need to know here from these verses. And we're going to jump back to verse 14. But he says this, the second thing we need to learn and we need to know is we need to stop living in fear. You need to long for the good stuff, and when you long for the good stuff, you can't live in fear. So we need to stop living in fear. This is what verse 14 says, second half. It says, do not what? Fear. You with me this morning? Do not what? Fear. A few more of you. Do not fear, Peter says. Peter is tying their fear to what other people are doing to them and how they're being treated. They're not scared of eternity. They're not scared of this big thing that's never going to impact their lives. They're living in fear of how people are treating them. And he says, don't live in fear, because what they do can't ultimately hurt you. Fear has so much power over our lives, doesn't it? I mean, we can allow fear in our lives to cripple us, to make us stagnant, to make us sit at home and lay in bed all day long. And that may sound attractive for a day, but that gets awful boring after a while, right? But fear can drive us to do that. Fear can drive us to just lock up and not allow anything to happen around us. Power plays into fear. It's really about where you are giving power in your life. Fear is us allowing something or someone to have power over us. That's ultimately what fear is, right? Like we give power to somebody else and we lose that power, and then fear overtakes us. Like we're giving power, and the world is giving power to a virus, and it's crippling so many of us in fear. We've given power to a racial movement that we don't understand and we don't know, and it's causing us to live in fear. We're giving power to people who are elected in positions, and it's causing us to live in fear. Fear is caused when we give power to something or someone over us. The Christians that Peter is writing to here, they're being persecuted. They're being persecuted because of what other people are doing to them, because they are simply living their good lives. They're simply living their lives following Jesus. But the Romans had power over them, and they had power to take their lives, to take their freedom, to make them do different things. But what Peter's trying to encourage them in is that they don't have power over the Christians' souls. They don't have power over their eternity. But they're still living in fear. When I'm fearful, I need to ask the question, who or what am I giving power to in my life? Who or what am I giving power to in my life? If I live in fear of rejection from a family member, I've given them power over me and over my emotions. If I'm living in fear of sickness or in death, I've given it power over me, and it controls me rather than me controlling it. We need to have the power over these things instead of just giving it away. The power to control our thoughts, our emotions, our feelings, our heart. And here's the reality. If you're living in fear, you're living in subjection to somebody else's power. If we live in fear, we're living underneath the influence and the power of somebody else. And so we have to take back the power. We have to take back the power, and there's a few things we need to understand here. One, we need to understand that God is still in charge of the universe, yes? We need to understand God is still in charge of the universe. We need to understand that Jesus is still on the throne, yes? We need to understand that God is bigger than any situation that you're facing, yes? And we need to understand that God still has the ultimate power, yes? We need to understand that no one ultimately can kill your soul. They can hurt the body, and the Christians in the first century knew this. They can hurt the body, they can kill the body, but they can't hurt the soul that is longing for the good stuff to be in eternity with God. Verse 13 there says, if you're committed to what is good, who ultimately can harm you? Who ultimately can harm you? So Peter says, first, long for the good stuff. Second, we need to stop living in fear. Third, he says in this section, we need to resolve to honor Christ. Resolve to honor Christ. This is what he says, verse 15 and verse 16. But honor the Messiah as Lord in your hearts. Always be ready to give a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. However, do this with gentleness and respect, keeping your conscience clear, so that when you are accused, those who denounce your Christian life will be put to shame. Here's the thing, we honor Christ by sharing hope that He has given us with other people around us. Yes? We honor Christ when we share the hope that we have with a world that needs hope around us. That's how we honor Christ. Hope is powerful. Giving hope is powerful to other people. There's a story of a dad who got caught in a riptide with two of his kids. He had a boy that was about 6 or 7 years old, and he had a young little girl. And the dad initially, he tries to rescue both kids, but he's not strong enough to do both. And so the boy is kind of frantically swimming, just trying to keep his head above water. And the dad says, I'm going to get my little girl out of here. I'm coming back for you. Just keep swimming, he says. And so he quickly gets the little girl off the shore, and he turns around, and he can't see the little boy anymore. And so he frantically starts searching, and so many other people start searching for them. After a little bit of time, and the nighttime came, and they were shining flashlights trying to find this boy. A light reflected off of the eyes of a little boy who was still trying to keep his head above water. And the dad runs out, pulls him out of the water, wraps him up in his arms, and he says, I'm so glad you're alive. I'm so glad you're alive. And the little boy replies this way. He said, you said you'd come for me if I just kept swimming. And so I just kept swimming. Hope is powerful. Hope is powerful because here's the reality, and we know this, right? No matter what happens here, this side of eternity, we have a hope for an eternity with our Heavenly Father that we get to look forward to. Hope is powerful. And if nothing else happens, we have assurance in that hope that is coming. Right now, today, do you really believe that Jesus is coming back and we get to inherit that eternity with Him? Do you believe it? Then we need to live it. We need to long for the good stuff. We need to not live in fear, and we need to honor Christ with our lives. So those three things Peter kind of dives into in the first little section here of this ending of chapter 3. But I want to dive into this final section in chapter 3 because he continues on but takes a little bit of a different angle. Verse 18 through 22, Peter writes this, For Christ also suffered for sins once and for all the righteous for the unrighteous, so that He might bring you to God after being put to death in the fleshly realm, but made alive in the spiritual realm. In that state, He also went and made a proclamation to the spirits in prison, who in the past were disobedient when God patiently waited in the days of Noah while an ark was being prepared. In it, a few, that is, 8 people, were saved through water. Baptism, which corresponds to this, now saves you, not the removal of the filth of the flesh, but the pledge of a good conscience towards God through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now that He has gone into heaven, He is at God's right hand with angels, authorities, and powers subject to Him. Okay, so let's unpack this little section here that closes out chapter 3. Something might have caught your eye there if you're not familiar with this section. Something might have caught your eye there, and for me, it's verse 19. Can we pull up verse 19 again, Lynette? In that state, He also went and made a proclamation to the spirits who are in prison. If you're like me, you read through that and you go, that's interesting. So let's dive into that just really quickly here. What Peter is talking about, and context is important here for this little section. I believe what Peter is talking about here are the human spirits of those who passed away in the flood of Noah in the book of Genesis. That's what Peter's talking about here. It says, Christ preached to them, and there's 2 different options in schools of thought. And there's multiple different schools of thought around this kind of whole verse, but we're going to hone in on just a couple. It says, Christ preached to them. 2 options here. 1, Christ preached to them figuratively in and through Noah while they were alive. That's a possibility of this verse. Secondly, it could mean that Christ actually went and literally preached to them when He, in the time between His crucifixion on the cross and when He walked out of the grave 3 days later. couple options for that. Both interpretations, what's true is that they were called spirits because they were in a spiritual condition when Peter wrote these words. Here's what we know for sure. A lot of people who lived in Noah's day while he was building the ark were not willing to obey God. A lot of people were not willing to follow God. 8 people lived, Noah and his family, and they were saved because of it. And Peter is teaching us, I think, an important lesson here. And it's this: we honor Christ by obeying the gospel and getting saved. We honor Christ and we honor God by obeying the gospel, responding to the gospel, and being saved. Because Peter continues on that conversation about Noah. Can we pull up verse 20 and 21 again? It says, "Who in the past were disobedient when God patiently waited in the days of Noah while an ark was being prepared. In it a few, that is 8 people, were saved through water. Baptism, which corresponds to this, now saves you, not the removal of filth from the flesh, but the pledge of a good conscience towards God through the resurrection of Jesus Christ." Here's what it boils down to. Hear me this morning, okay? And don't turn off, okay? The simple act of baptism in and of itself does not save you. Going over here and getting wet does not save you. Washing dirt off of your body does not save you. What saves you is when we honor Christ, but by putting our faith in Jesus and submitting to everything that He says. When we put our faith, hope, and trust in Jesus because of what He did, that is what saves us. And I love what verse 21 here says. I love what other translations say a little bit more. This whole part about baptism being a pledge for a good conscience. I like it better what other translations say when they say that it's an appeal to God for a clean conscience. I love that word appeal. I love how in baptism we go, God, I am surrendering everything to you in this moment. And we appeal to God, God, save me. God, save me. And I think your response to the gospel is incomplete if you've not been baptized. Honestly, I think that your response to the gospel is incomplete if you refuse to be baptized. And it's like, and hear me, like I believe that our response to the gospel is incomplete, not just with baptism, but if we refuse to confess Jesus as Lord, it's incomplete. Our response to the gospel is incomplete if we refuse to repent. It's incomplete. I believe that our response to the gospel is even incomplete if we refuse to surrender our lives and follow Jesus no matter what He calls us to. Our response to the gospel is incomplete then. And so today you can profess your faith in Jesus through baptism. And I don't know everybody's stories, but I know for sure that some of us, at some time or another, have made a decision, I want to follow Jesus with my life, but we decided I don't want to get baptized for some reason. Today you can complete your response to the gospel through that. Jesus calls all of us to this. Baptisms take place traditionally, and especially in the book of Acts. It was an immediate response to accepting Jesus. And so as we wrap up chapter 3 today, I want to wrap up this message and challenge you. If you've not been baptized, be baptized. Be baptized. Complete your response to the gospel this morning. Is today the day that you're going to take that step? Is today the day that you're going to step out boldly and say, I want to appeal to God for a clean conscience through baptism? And I know some of you don't want to get up in front of people. You don't want to have attention drawn on you. And I get it, right? I don't always love being the center of attention. You can laugh at that. That's fine. Well, let me push, Dennis, we get it. Let me push against that a little bit. And here's the thing. Jesus left His throne in heaven, came down to earth, lived 33 years, was tortured by soldiers, was beaten, had a crown of thorns put on His head, had to carry His own cross up on top of a hill where they nailed Him to it, and He was displayed there where He died. And we don't want to get wet. It was said this about baptism. Baptism is the great equalizer in life. Whether you have a $50 haircut or a $10 haircut, or you don't need a haircut, you all come out of the water and you're all going to look the same. It doesn't matter. We have clothes for you to change into. We have towels for you to dry off with. If you're old enough to make this decision for yourself, we encourage you, I challenge you this morning. Take that step. Let's complete your response to the gospel. So myself and the shepherds will be out here. A couple of us will be right by the doors. A couple of us will be in the foyer. We want to talk with you about that. And if you're ready today, we want to help you complete your response to the gospel and getting baptized. All you have to do is get up and say, I'm ready. I'm ready. And if you have somebody in your life who's been influential in your walk, in your relationship with Jesus, bring them with, because we would encourage that individual, if they're a believer, to baptize you. It doesn't have to be one of us. Any believer can baptize you. What's to stop you today? What's to stop you right now, this week? No more excuses. Complete your response to the gospel. And here's the thing. Satan is going to work through this. Satan doesn't want you to take this step. Satan doesn't want you to step out and say, I am going to do this now. He's going to say, oh, you can wait. Oh, that's not really true. Oh, that's not really what that means. Or, oh, everybody's going to look at you. He's going to try and get you to stop doing that. No more waiting. Let's respond now. 1 Peter chapter 3 ends with simple challenges for us that are life-changing. We need to long for the good stuff. We need to not live in fear. We need to honor Christ, and we need to fully respond to the gospel. The question is now, how are you going to respond? Heavenly Father, I pray for every single individual in this room, no matter where they are at in their relationship with you. I pray that you challenge each one of us in our hearts to take that next step, whatever it may be. God, maybe there is somebody here who needs to step out and say, I want to trust you, Jesus, with my life. I want to be baptized into you, and I want to be baptized into this family of believers. God, I challenge and I pray, God, give them the strength and the courage to step out and take that step this morning. And God, maybe there's those that are living in fear, those that are tied up with sin, those that are just not honoring Christ, honoring you with the life that they're living. God, I just pray that you would give each one of us a clear next step and then the strength and the courage to step out and to do it. God, we love you. We thank you for Jesus. Thank you for everything that he's done for us. I pray all of this in his name. Amen. And so this morning, over the next few moments, the time is yours if you want to respond to what God's doing in your life. Like I said, myself and the shepherds will be by this back door or in the foyer. If you're ready to respond in any way, please come. We would love to talk with you and to celebrate that decision with you this morning. Or if you're here and you just want somebody to talk with or to pray with about what's going on in life, we would be honored to do that with you as well. Will you stand with me as we continue to worship this morning?